Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the North Carolina Department of Information Technology Broadband Infrastructure Office's Broadband Pole Replacement Program webinar. My name is Crystal Dickerson. I am joined here today by several of my colleagues in the Broadband Infrastructure Office. We will be recording this webinar, just a few housekeeping notes up front. So we will be recording it. We will be taking questions at the end via the chat feature. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We may be able to answer some along the way, but we will definitely answer them all at the end. If there are any questions that we either don't get to based on time or need to get back to you individually, we will either do so or add some additional FAQs to our website. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Angie Bailey, Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office.
Thank you. Thanks, Crystal. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are excited to look towards spending some of this money that we've had for this pole replacement fund. So we appreciate y'all joining. This audience for this morning, you may know, is for our pre-qualified vendors from our RFP process that resulted in the convenience contract. So it's to talk with, so you all are the ones that are eligible to apply for reimbursement. And so we'll be going through kind of how that works. Next slide, please. And so I'm Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office. I think I've worked with most of you. I want to make sure everybody knows Gretchen Ramirez. She's a program analyst on our team who does a wide array of work for us. She was a former network engineer for one of our big telecom companies. And we grabbed her from Office of Rural Health at DHHS. So she has a lot of background in telehealth, and I think that she's been more on the back end of what we've been doing, but y'all will be interacting with her more. And I think most of y'all know Stephanie Jane Edwards, who's our broadband data and mapping lead for our office, who's amazing. Both are amazing. And I want to thank Jeff Brooks and Kurt Frenzel on our team, who did a lot of the early development on the pole replacement work. So that's our focused group, and then we have more people in the back working on this. Next slide. So we'll kind of run through the program overview. I hope that everyone has read the program guidance. That's really important. So please take a look at it. And that came out in November. And then we also published the application instructions a couple weeks ago with application materials. So please make sure you've actually read the instructions too before you dig into this. So we'll run through application processes, the map, of course. We found out that mapping, of course, is a huge part of this program, as it is with all of our programs. We'll run through the data templates, the data exchange, which is similar. It's the same data exchange that we're using for CAB for our protests and with the counties, tracking reporting, and then questions and next steps. Next slide, please. So the pole replacement program, you all may know, is a little bit of a strange program because it's about paying for costs of replacing utility poles, but it has to still be tied to building broadband to an unserved area, right? So this is Treasury funded. So the purpose, I just want to make sure everyone's clear, is to speed and facilitate the deployment of broadband service to individuals, businesses, ag operations, and community access points in areas unserved with broadband. And so it's for you all as communication service providers that have incurred eligible pole replacement costs to apply to us for reimbursement. It has to be in unserved areas. And again, as mentioned, this is applicants for the program have to have gone through our broadband expansion and access RFP that we released last summer. And we just announced those pre-qualified vendors a couple weeks ago. Those are listed on our website. And then, so even though what you're submitting to us now is fairly straightforward, the RFP and all those terms and conditions that were published in that all apply to the program and what you're submitting. Next slide. So high level, I think you all know this is American Rescue Plan Act funding, specifically state and local fiscal recovery funds that we're using for this pot, that the legislature appropriated for this pot, $100 million. And so the reimbursements that are per pole, we can pay out 50% of the eligible pole replacement costs paid by you all, or $10,000 per pole, whichever is less. So of course, we as an office are looking at how can we get this money out this year. We can accept eligible costs that were incurred after June 1st, 2021. That's in the legislation. So we hope that y'all will be going back and digging back into your past invoices and expenses to pull out eligible costs. There is some conflicting language in the legislation about the timing of the program. So I just wanted to kind of say that now in case you come across it and think it's confusing. The legislation talks about the general fund being authorized until December 30th, 2026. But then it also says that the program expires on December 31st, 2024. It's somewhat of a moot point because ARPA, SLFRF funds are supposed to be obligated according, per Treasury rules by December 31st, 2024. So we are obviously keeping a close watch on what obligated means and what that conflicting language means, and looking at the timing of how long it will really take to get this money obligated and paid out. So we are processing, as it says in the guidance, on a first come, first served basis. So in a sense, it's not super competitive like our other programs. It may be competitive at the end when there's a finite amount left, but we feel like you all probably have some time. We think we don't really know how much pole replacement costs that you all have, eligible costs, but we feel like this is a big pot and we want you all to get your requests in soon, but also take the time you need to make sure that they're correct. So what we say in the guidance is once 70% of the funding has been dispersed, we'll release some additional rules on kind of how we decide how we prioritize those last handful of reimbursements that we get as there's less money available. We are going to be asking you all to let us know this is on a one-on-one basis, maybe by email. We'll probably follow up by email, or phone calls, an estimate of how many polls you think you may be submitting to us. Because again, we're looking at our spend rate for this program. So watch out for that discussion, please. Next slide. So definitions, I know this is a little bit boring and it's a lot of text on the page, but I just want to make sure everybody's clear. This is in our guidance, obviously. The eligible applicants are communication service providers, and that's defined in statute and in this legislation. The pole owner is sorry, there's a typo in that. It's a city or cooperatively organized entity that owns utility poles. So it's not investor-owned utility poles like the Duke Energies of the world. This is how it was written in our legislation. I assume it's that because the Duke poles and other IOU-owned poles are regulated by the FCC, that's kind of a different thing. So this program is specific to poles owned by for example, our electric co-ops and our municipalities. Qualifying internet access service. So that is basically fixed service at 100 symmetrical or greater. It's based on ARPA rules. So that means whatever your underlying broadband project is, there has to be an underlying broadband project to an unserved area. That's the whole foundation of the program. And you have to be building to at least 100 symmetrical. So qualified project, and again, this is one of the really important definitions. So it has to be a project undertaken by your company that's not affiliated with pole owner, where you're seeking to provide qualifying internet access service on a retail basis to one or more households, businesses, ag operations, or community access points in an unserved area. So it can't just be any kind of random utility poles that are being replaced. Again, it has to be part of a project that's serving bringing service to an unserved area. The definition of broadband service in our legislation is 25.3, so unserved is less than 25.3. And again, it has to be a project in an unserved area. There is one other kind of piece in here that's important in the unserved area definition. So it talks about a pole shall be presumed to be located in an unserved area if the pole is located in an area that's the subject of a federal or state grant to deploy broadband service, where that grant's limited to unserved. So essentially some of our large federal projects in the state, like RDOF, some of our state, our great grants that automatically or the qualifying factor is that it has to be to an unserved area. That's kind of, it's just recognizing that those polls are kind of easier to verify in a sense. So I just want to, I know that's a lot, and again, I hope y'all will read the guidance, but I just want to run through that background. Next slide, please. And so again, so in some ways this program is very straightforward, but then there's a little bit of strange nuances. So if areas with federal or state funded broadband projects, these are kind of the rules that we laid out in the guidance. So obviously the program itself can't disallow these complementary pole replacement costs. And that's kind of on you all as the applicant. If you're an RDOF recipient, you have to confirm that you're allowed to accept this funding. The eligible pole replacement costs submitted for reimbursement can't obviously be reimbursed by another grant program or be part of the matching funds. So for example, say you got if you're applying for a grant, say you apply for a great grant, you have to submit your project costs, which is the grant amount, matching funds, and it's $300,000. And then and that's at the time of application, and that's what you get awarded. And then when you're actually doing the detailed engineering design work, and you realize, there's way more poles that have to be replaced. We didn't put this in our budget. Then that's the type of scenario where you could apply to this program for additional funding. But if those costs are already in your project your project for that grant, then you can't apply because you can only be reimbursed once. So I hope that makes sense. I think we will follow up with some FAQs, and we may need to kind of expand on that in writing to be more specific, but that's the concept. You're responsible, obviously, for any compliance with the underlying grant programs that may be involved, and ensuring that they don't prohibit reimbursement of these costs. And then there's a lot of certifications in the actual application form that address these factors. So I just wanted to kind of go over that. Then we may get questions, but that's, again, this is how the legislation was written. We think it's reasonable in the sense that costs are hard to predict right now with all the supply and demand, both with labor and with supplies. So we understand that sometimes you may have submitted a grant project application and costs came out to be different than what you thought. So that's the concept behind the program. And I may think of other things to add, but for now, I'll turn it over to Gretchen.
Thank you, Angie. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. So in the guidance, and again, cannot say enough, please read the guidance. If you have any questions about the guidance, feel free to reach out. We can kind of break it down to simpler terms. But in the guidance, it does talk about the public dashboard. So we will have a dashboard on our website that will talk about the number of applicants received, processed, and rejected, and then also the reasons, and then the amount of each reimbursement, total number of reimbursements, and then the status of pending reimbursements, and then the estimated remaining balance in the program fund. We do have a tracker set up, so as we receive requests, we can track all this data. It will be updated monthly, and it'll just be a simple dashboard that's on our website. Next slide. Okay, so steps to participate. So again, visit the website for full details, the guidance, very important. You're going to use your pole replacement map to reference eligible areas. So we do understand that most of the areas are already mapped, so it would be easy, to go ahead and find your eligible area. If you do have a project that's not mapped, like Angie said before, privately funded or county funded projects, you have to go through some extra steps. You do want to ensure that your data team has credentials to access the data exchange. To get that done, you just go to the broadband mapping email and request those credentials. Once you have those credentials, you'll have access to the web page. You can go in and submit your information. You're going to use the project area and reimbursement form to submit the eligible project info. Now, the project area and reimbursement form, currently it doesn't have any information as far as like certifying. So because we want to make this as simple as possible, you're going to submit your application once, and it does have the certification information on there. We are considering adding some sort of certification or signature line, or maybe a separate form, so that every time you submit project information, we're certifying again. And then we're going to use the project area and reimbursement form to submit the poll data. So you do want to make sure that your project area is approved first, then you will be submitting your poll data. It can be on a rolling basis, so we don't have anything in place that says you can't put everything on one form, or you have to separate it out. So it can be for a rolling basis. If you decide that you have information each quarter, you could submit it each quarter, or you could submit it, we did this project, we completed it, now we want to go ahead and do our reimbursement. The next slide, please. Okay, so this is information about the application. Again, the instructions are on the website. There are one-time application materials. So you do have an application form. And then we do require an updated corporate organizational chart. We want documentation of the affordability program. We need the BIRD anti-lobbying form, your substitute W-9, and then the vendor electronic payment form. And all of these are one-time materials. Again, you can submit your template that has your project information and your poll information as many times, as you have information, but this particular packet is one time. You can submit all this information. What it does is it actually helps us to make sure that we can get payments to you. So just make sure that if there's anything missing from this packet and we've asked you for the information, that you get that to us as soon as possible. Once the application is approved, then that's when you can submit the request. So as soon as your packet is done, then we can start processing your poll information. Next slide. Okay, so this is just kind of an example of the application lifecycle. So we are a small and mighty team. So we just want to kind of like highlight exactly what's going to happen. So the application is submitted with the project area and reimbursement form. As I said before, we want to make sure the application packet is approved first. Then you can start submitting your project area and reimbursement form. We do suggest that you submit small reimbursements first. We're just trying to, make sure that we've got all of our processes down. We want to make sure that we're able to process everything in a timely manner. So if you could start with small reimbursements first, that would be great. Or if you want to do the template and just do one project at a time. So say you have a project that has 30 polls and you want to submit that, one at a time for organization, we would appreciate that as well. Once the project area is said, this is approved, it's an approved project area, then you would have your poll locations verified. So what that does is we're saying, okay, this project area is approved. These polls are within this project area. We have to have that done before we can consider the application complete. In the guidance, it talks about how we will review a completed application within 60 days. So once we've verified that the poll locations are within the project area, that's where it's considered complete, and that 60-day window starts. Then the application moves to the review team, and the review team will verify the poll ownerships, the cost, backup documentation. And then once that has happened, it'll be within that 60-day window. Then it's considered reimbursable, and then it's moved to the fiscal process, and then payments will be issued within 30 days. That's how that guidance works for the 60 and the 30 days. As far as polls, if you're submitting your polls and you submit a large amount of polls, maybe you're, I have 300 polls, I want to submit all those at once. Just understand that it will take longer time to get that application to the complete state and then kick off that 60-day window. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so backup documentation. All over the website, all over our guidance, we just talk about backup documentation. We do ask that you include backup documentation for the costs. It could be things like invoices, agreements, copies of checks, different things like that. It has to show the cost incurred, and then we have to have evidence that shows that the costs have been paid by the applicant. And then we want to see the completion of poll replacement and the date of works completed. We're not quite sure what everybody's going to have. Like, this will look different for each provider. So we're just kind of keeping it general. If there are any questions or anything that we need extra, we do ask that you kind of work with us if we are asking for additional information. Okay, and that's it for me. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Stephanie Jane.
Thanks, Gretchen. And I'll be picking up on that kind of process that we go through and elaborating a little bit more about some of the resources that Gretchen just mentioned, starting with the NC1 Map broadband page, because if you're not familiar with it already, this is sort of a central online home for our broadband office's maps and data, including the pole replacement program. So if you can use the link that's available in this slide or the QR code, this is what you'll see. And as you scroll down, you'll see some information cards, like we have some examples here of maps linked to this page with an information card. Scroll right past the ones that look like this, and just on that second row, you'll see one by itself on a row, and that's the broadband pole replacement map. And we're going to walk through that map here in just a moment. If you go to the next slide, I think that we wanted to kind of preface the demo I'm about to do of the broadband pole replacement map, because it is indicating known eligible project areas with hex bins, a specific kind of mathematically derived hexagons that are the Uber H3 level 7 hex bins, which you see here in the middle image. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how those work, and they generally have specific sizes you can choose from. And so if you're looking at these slides larger later, you can see how this is overlaid on the Raleigh area of North Carolina and get a sense of how much that covers. And those are about 2 square miles in area. So what we have done is sort of depicted all these federally and state funded eligible areas in terms of these hexagons, to give a little extra room to have an eligible pole replacement that is in proximity or within these hexagons to the original project locations. All right, so now that that's covered, let's go into the next slide. I think it'll be time just about to start our demo. This is what the map will look like when you load it, and we've included a link here in the slides and a QR code. And I'm going to share my screen for just a minute and show you some of the features of how this works. We're going to be sharing these slides after the webinar is over, and then we'll have a few extra slides that point out some things that I'll be showing in this demo. Are we seeing my screen right now? Yeah? Okay, thanks. So you'll see this splash page, and just click OK. It has some additional information for you. In the map here, clear that. You'll see those shaded areas, and that is actually at the statewide scale, those hexagons I just described. If they're shaded, that's indicating that it's part of a known eligible program area. You can pan around, you can zoom in, you can click on things to give you a better sense of things in an area of interest for you. Scoot up. I actually zoomed in on South Carolina by mistake. Once you kind of get a feel for that, you can also take a look at our program, like as in pole replacement program filters. And if that window is open by default, but I want to point out, you can minimize it here. And when you do, you may have a better view of these resource links that I want you to know about. There's a help document. If you click on it, it'll pull up this PDF that gives you a lot of helpful tutorials and hints about using the pole replacement map and all the things you can do with it. If you didn't have any questions answered by today's webinar, and there's another link where you can download this layer here that's showing the eligible locations data set. And these are the locations that are eligible in terms of known state and federally funded programs, as well as hexagons that contain known unserved locations. So back to these program filters, if you're coming in here to kind of scope out a project area of interest where you've done some pole replacements or are doing some pole replacements, and you're going to be looking for reimbursement, you can search programs by name and it'll filter those results for you. If I zoom back out to original scale, you can see the map view change if I select a filter for only the most recent round of ARPA, and you have to hit the apply button for those changes to take effect. But when they do, you'll see these areas in that hexagon form, and then the table accompanying the data down below will update as well. And you can click on this button here and you'll see how the record totals change based on your filter selections. So you may want to choose a specific grant program, even a specific grantee that may be your organization, that kind of thing, to filter further. And then you can actually export those results into a CSV file to use in your own data. The CSV file has these ID numbers. That grid ID field is the ID number for these hexagons. And the link I showed you just a minute ago, this one right here, that's where if you have your own GIS and you want to import the whole layer of hexagons into your own mapping systems, you can do that and then use these tables to create different subsets. You can also look under the program field all the way at the bottom. You can choose just unserved locations instead, because that may be most relevant to one of your locally or privately funded projects. And then also you can do almost the very same thing, but a shortcut to it is this unserved filter button. So when you hit apply on that, from the general data, you'll kind of reach the same point. But keep in mind, many of these other programs are geared to serve unserved locations. And so if you have one of those selected and then you click the unserved filter, it'll take everything off the map because we're already considering that to be like protected and served by that program, that commitment of funds. So besides that, it might be helpful to know that you can add your own data into this map. It's extra interactive. And so you do that down here in this corner. When you click to add data, I would suggest hitting this file tab. And what that'll do is allow you to drag and drop or use this upload button to add a CSV file or some other kind of tabular file of your lat longs, or if you have like maybe you already know about your pole locations or your project area locations in a point file. This can take in your lat longs. It can also use like maybe you have a network diagram from your project and you have a KMZ file of it or KML. You can load that here. I don't have a file, but if I did, it would bring that in and temporarily add it to the view for me. And then let's say this is where it was, it would zoom into that area that depicts the file I just added for me. Nobody else will be able to see your data. This is just a temporary view for your use. If it would help you to kind of game plan your project and take a look at how it lines up with our data about unserved locations and qualifying project areas. It might also help you create your project area from this information in terms of the hexagons. Though you'll probably be submitting project areas at the location level if you're dealing with a locally or privately funded project using the same BSLs that you use when you report them to the FCC's broadband data collection program. Let's see, what else do we want to show you? Once you have gotten into an area of interest and you want to make use of maybe a subset of data, let's say you've just used filters in here, or you can make some of your own custom queries even, or you have manually, or you've added your own data, you can then use these buttons in the top left to manually select some hexagons that are relevant to your project. There's some options here. I personally like the lasso tool because you can freehand sort of, okay, this is an area that is relevant to my project area. Let's say I'm serving some downtown Lillington, some surrounding area that was unserved. You double click and it'll select all of these eligible hex bins that are part of that project area. And you can go right here with the table and you have the option to either export just your selection there and the data affiliated with it, including totals of locations that were underserved and overall total of locations in the hexagons, or you can export all of the data that was in your filter up here at the time. And you can always clear out your selection with this button here. And you can always clear out any selections you've made to your filters over on the right by hitting cancel. So that may be the most important information. Sorry about my tab crashing just there. We'll just get that pulled back up. And I did want to note that some project areas that you'll be seeking to get approved that are not already in our map and part of this, the federally or state funded programs, you may need to, you'll be submitting those by location data, and you may see that our data currently only depicts on our public map the locations that are in the latest data depicted as unserved, and that's at 25 down, 3 megabits per second up. But we also have the data for locations that are served today, but were unserved at the time that you started the project that you are applying for pulling reimbursement on. We're still working on the best and most user-friendly way to reflect that into this public-facing map. But feel free to send us project areas that are either in or not quite in some of the unserved areas that are in the latest data as of this map, knowing that you might want to, you can double check your records internally, but there should be records that align your project, because the intent is to reimburse pole replacements that occurred with projects that were specifically geared toward reaching unserved areas. Sorry about that. There's not an underserved in this program. It's all either it's served or unserved. So I just want to help keep that straight. Yeah.
Stephanie Jane, can I just add, so just to clarify, so because you all can, we can reimburse costs incurred after June 1, 2021, that's what Stephanie Jane's talking about, is that this map is current, so it gets a little more complex if you're going back and some of these locations were unserved then, but show as served now. So we are trying to figure out a simple way. We have the data, but it's figuring out the simplest way to work with y'all on that.
Yeah. And just the last thing to say, I guess, about that is that we're using data dating back to the December 31st, 2020 FCC 477 data, because the BDC program of data collection had not been launched at that point. So projects dating back that far would be at the time the most recent publicly available data as of June 1st, which is the start date. June 1st, 2021 is the start date of eligible reimbursements under this program. And so that would be the data set that would be following. And then moving forward, the thought is that more locations became served, and we'll be working with you, and hopefully you can work with us if you find that you have a project somewhere in between June 1st, 2021 and today where the data is not adequately reflecting your unserved areas in that December 31st, 2020 data, because maybe some location became unserved due to some data corrections or an anomaly like that, and we can work with you on it. But we do have access to all that data, and there'll be some trickiness to having to rely on census block level data and those fully unserved census blocks. But we also expect to be able to add some more information on that to this map. But I'm gonna close out the demo, and we'll get back to our slide deck to show you a little bit more information about the templates that we'll use to submit data for the program.
And can I go out of order for a second? I'm sorry, while y'all are pulling that up, because I meant to say this. I know we're doing questions at the end, but Chris has a good question and I meant to address it. So the end date for reimbursements, we can only reimburse work that has already been completed. And so it has to be a pole that's already been replaced, that you've already exchanged money with the pole owner. The only thing that we're not requiring removal of the old pole, just because we understand that that sometimes can take a long time. But the legislation talks a little bit about good faith estimates, and we talked a little bit about that, but it also says it's a reimbursement program, so the work has to be completed. Money has to be obligated by the end of this year. So we will continue to talk with you all about what kind of the cutoff date will need to be in the fall. So I hope that helps. And on pole owners, I just want to say we do plan to reach out to them. I think they obviously have a very important role. Their role is primarily with you all as far as being able to provide the documentation you all need to submit your reimbursements. But we do appreciate their work in this program, and we'll probably have a separate webinar just with them to make sure we can answer any questions they have. All right, sorry, Stephanie J.
No, that was great. I'm glad you thought to mention that. So this is a little overview of the broadband data templates for the pole replacement program. And these are the instructions that are included in that file. It's basically an Excel file with 3 tabs in it. And the first one is a README tab that has instructions about how to fill out data to share with us your relevant program area that you want approved for pole reimbursement. Sorry, there's a lot of text here, but the general idea here is that you would follow the instructions in this tab where you see these instructions, and then fill out a data tab and then export that to CSV using the file name kind of structure that we're talking about here, and then upload it to our broadband data exchange using your browser. And we'll cover that here in a few minutes. But that's basically the gist of it. And just to pay attention to the date stamps here. The last line of that information will be about the date that the template was updated. So if we have to make any changes along the way, we'll make announcements on that, and you can check date stamps for that. If we go to the next slide, then I'll show you the data dictionary for the project area reimbursement form. This is kind of like, it's also in that instructional tab. And you've got a description of all the fields in the data, some examples, and some more details there. You're going to want project ID and provider ID, which you can get from the FCC's national maps, the funding map, and the brand name is the field that you're probably familiar with from the FCC's BDC map, the Broadband Data Collection Program. And we're interested in your project start and end dates for the program. And if it's a known federally or state funded program, we hopefully have that information, but it's helpful to include it here so that it'll make it into our database tables. And we are looking for the code representing your technology type. That was the primary technology type used in the project. You may have had a mixture. But then locations served, an estimated total, your maximum download and upload speeds as per the agreement of your original project and that commitment. And then for only your locally or privately funded projects, we don't have data already in our maps for those. And so we're asking for additional information, which will require more records. We would like to receive the hexagon IDs representing the hexagons that delineate your project, as well as just duplicate records to represent each of the unique broadband serviceable location IDs from CostQuest Fabric for that project. We are asking for privately and locally funded projects to be depicted at the location level, which we are hoping you already have by participating in the FCC's broadband data collection. But we also have that hexagon ID request because if you, we know from experience the challenges that we might be running into, that we're running into, and you might be as well, on getting accurate depiction of in this new BSL format. So if you do get stuck and you run into questions, please let us know and we will try our best to work with you on depicting those program areas so that we can have enough information to approve them. If you go to the next slide, that's just a little view of what that template looks like, which you can fill out and export to CSV. If you go to the next slide, that's the data dictionary that is also in the instructions, just spelling out the fields. Some of them are the same, and they will line you up with the previously approved project area. But this is for your poll locations data. And this is that data Gretchen mentioned you may be submitting multiple times along the way during different phases of your project or something like that, as opposed to a one-time approval for the project area data. And for this, the most important part is highlighted there, the latitude and longitude of the polls that you're hoping to have reimbursed when based on the replacement that was done, and some additional details there about the poll and the circumstances of its replacement. If you go to the next slide, we won't linger on it. It's just the view of the template. That's a separate tab which you'd fill out and export. Now here's just an overview, which you may have seen before, about the data exchange, where you would submit this information once you've filled it out and exported it, along with supporting documentation. It's using Amazon Web Services, and you can use your internet browser at the link we'll provide to your data contacts, along with instructions and the template that we just went over. So we're planning to share this with data contacts that we're considering to be the authorized representative that you will indicate in your application form. If for some reason you have additional data contacts or other data contacts, please send that information to broadbandmapping@nc.gov, and we will get that information to them as well. It's a shared set of credentials that will be the same for any number of people at your organization who need to just send us data. Okay, I think that's it for the broadband data exchange. Let's go to the next slide.
Stephanie Jane, I'm sorry, can I add one more thing? Just on the data exchange, so as mentioned on that slide is the way we have set up these folders. Each provider has a folder, and so we've used these for our CAB protests, and now we're using it for pole replacement. So whoever has access to your folder as your company would have access to these other data from other programs. So if you submitted a CAB protest, that's going to be accessible in this same folder. So we want to be mindful of confidentiality issues. We don't think that's a problem, but we want to make sure you're aware of it. I mean, it's also possible because this is a data exchange. This data is not meant to live in there in perpetuity. So we could remove protest data out of it or those types of things. So if you have concerns, please talk with us. This is our only big infrastructure program that's not running through our EBS system, but we felt like these folders are a better way to go for this program. But let us know if you have questions about the access to your company's data within these kind of different programmatic folders.
Yeah,
thanks,
you.
Stephanie Jane.
And that reminds me to tell you that for external use, like these are secure folders, and within each one you can only see your own organization's information and no one else can other than our office. But within each one, once you log in, you'll now see a broadband pole replacement program or BPRP subfolder, and that would be the best place to upload information specific to this program, because a data contact at your organization may have already shared some information with us very recently related to the CAB program or some other things. And so this will help us keep that separated and keep track of what you're sharing with us very recently. And we will give you advance notice if we kind of reached maybe an end of the program phase or calendar year and we want to clean out these folders to make it easy to spot new content. So thanks for your help with that. If you go to the next slide, this is my last slide here that I just wanted to kind of re-highlight the accountability and tracking that we aim to do to share with the public and key stakeholders about what's done and accomplished with the funds for this program. And Angie's already mentioned a dashboard that will be on our website, sort of tracking totals and expenditures and where the funds go. This is a screen capture example from a map you are probably more familiar with from the GREAT Grant program, where we started tracking totals through our database on dollars spent on various projects that were approved in awards. So for the pole replacement program, you may begin to see some of that data added into the interactive map that we walked through through today, and we may have a little bit of a combination of that map and the dashboard map showing things about the project areas that are approved, the funds and the total poles replacements, potentially even some estimates about the unserved locations associated with projects that were that had pole replacements approved. We're not planning to show externally or to the public any specific pole locations, because that's the only thing we can think of as being a potentially sensitive piece of information on the part of the pole owners. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Gretchen, who's going to close us out and take questions.
Thank you so much.
Oh, Crystal. I thought you said Gretchen. Yes. I'm so sorry.
That's
Go,
okay.
Crystal.
No worries. We're at my very favorite part, where we get to answer your important questions that you put in the chat. So I know that we've answered one already, but we do have a question. If we are both a pole owner and an ISP, are we able to ask for reimbursement to replace our own bad poles?
Yeah, unfortunately, Nathan, no, the qualified projects have to be with unaffiliated pole owners. So that, unfortunately, in the legislation that leaves out French Broad and Roanoke specifically. So our EMCs that are also broadband providers. And on the additional question, well, Crystal, sorry, go ahead. I did have
Oh,
one
no.
other comment on the
Go
next
ahead.
question too. About
Go ahead.
sorry. About pole remediation and trussing costs. So I did add the eligible pole replacement cost definition. So it really is for about pole replacement itself. So it has to specifically be a full replacement.
Perfect. And I'm just, for folks that may view this later, I'm gonna read your pole eligible, the replacement cost definition, just so we have an answer to that. The actual and reasonable costs paid or incurred by a communication service provider after June 1st, 2021 to remove and replace a pole, including the amount of any expenditures to remove and dispose of the existing pole, purchase and install a replacement pole, and transfer any existing facilities to the new pole. The term includes costs paid or incurred by the party responsible for the cost of a pole replacement to reimburse the party that performs the pole replacement. The term does not include costs that the party incurs initially that have been reimbursed to the party by another party ultimately responsible for the cost. So there we have it. And if we have any additional questions, please go ahead and add them in the chat. We really want to make sure we have a few more minutes left, and we want to make sure and answer any questions you have.
Can I add a couple thoughts while we're collecting more questions? So I think that we've got to figure out the backup documentation question. So we think that the pole owners may have different types of paperwork for this. We know that pole owners, when this program came out in legislation, were kind of asked to figure out how they could attribute costs to individual poles. So they've kind of known that, and I think I've been working with that question. But that's kind of, we look forward to working through that with you. I think also the private builds are going to be, we wanted to allow that. It is unusual maybe for a broadband provider to have a build specifically to just an unserved area. Maybe not, but that's something we'll have to work with you all on. And this kind of issue of past mapping may take a little more coordination, but we hope the program is relatively straightforward. I do think that, as Gretchen said, if you all can send kind of a small reimbursement to begin with, after you get your application form approved, spend a small reimbursement just to make sure that you're clear on processes, and that we're clear before you spend time pulling together, 400 poles. And we're happy to do individual meetings with you as a company to kind of talk through your specific needs. And we could look at doing, so if you could reach out to Gretchen on that and maybe let her know too, if you have mapping specific questions, kind of flag that. Because if it's mapping related, then we'll need to pull in Stephanie Jane. And I also want to recognize Daniel Turner, I think, is on the call. And so he, with our partner, our Center for Geographic Information and Analysis, helped develop the pole replacement map that Stephanie Jane has reviewed. So we appreciate their help.
So we have one additional question that comes in that says, oh, we've got a few. This is good. So if an ISP is also the pole owner and are not allowed to apply in this case, which scenario would an ISP be allowed to apply if they own all their own poles?
So if I'm reading it correctly, so if the ISP is the pole owner, they cannot apply for reimbursement on their own poles. That's just what the legislation says. So if you were on someone else's poles, you could apply. And if someone was on your poles as a pole owner, they could apply. If that makes sense.
Thank you. Yes, and they asked, there's a follow-up question. Am I understanding correctly, Duke poles or public poles do not qualify? Only poles owned by municipalities or co-ops, but not co-ops that are ISPs. Is that correct?
Yes, so not investor-owned utilities like Duke Energy that's right, that those do not qualify. So it's muni. There's a definition in the guidance. Muni-owned poles, co-op-owned poles, but co-ops cannot be reimbursed. Co-ops cannot be reimbursed for costs on their own poles, if that makes sense. This is why we write these things out. So I hope that makes sense.
Great. If we don't have any other questions, there's our email addresses up here, pollreplacement@nc.gov. So you're feel free to email us with any additional questions. You can always reach out to us on our website, which is ncbroadband.gov. And we appreciate everyone attending today. We'll have the slides up on our website at ncbroadband.gov later today. And thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.